Everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is Jonmichael Moy, and I am thrilled to be hosting today's Products That Counts webinar. Products That Counts is a nonprofit dedicated to enriching the careers of over 500,000 product managers globally. Our mission is to support and empower product managers. From our renowned industry awards that recognize outstanding achievements to our education webinars like the one that you're attending right now, and award-winning podcasts that feature product leaders and innovators. Today, we're extremely fortunate to have an exceptional product leader, Gerard Doyle, who is the Vice President of Product and Marketing at the Weather Network. And he's actually based here in Toronto, the same city that I'm here. Gerard brings years of valuable experience leading product teams in digital media. And I've had the pleasure of working with him in our past lives, which I'll go into later. But he's worked at the Weather Network, TVO, and I can really attest to his deep knowledge of not just about product strategy and product leadership, but his keen ability to mentor product leaders as well too. Today, Gerard will be speaking on the essential skills of every product manager must master. He'll focus on soft skills such as communication, empathy, and leadership, and why it's so important in shaping your your product management career. A study in Pendo showed that poor communication was one of the top challenges for product teams. I think over 70% of product managers cite this as a significant barrier or effectiveness to driving product vision and alignment. So, really looking forward to Gerard's our talk today. Before we dive in, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So today's session is recorded, so the recording will be made available after the session, and you'll get an email link afterwards. And we encourage you to ask questions as well. So there's a Q&A feature here within Zoom. So please submit your questions, and we'll answer them near the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gerard and welcome to the stage. So welcome, Gerard, and I'll let you go away at it.
Thanks, Jonmichael. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to connect. I know we've both worked together. I don't know how long it's been now. It's got to be like 15, 16 years. I think we're both getting up there in age now. We've been at this a while, yeah. But it's good to reconnect. I think it's great what you do for the product community, and I'm happy to be here. So we just dive in. Ready to roll?
Yep, all set.
Go. All right, we're working. Okay, so who am I? John just kind of did a brief intro there. Gerard Doyle. I've been working in product now for probably 25 years. I'm currently the VP of product at the Weather Network, Pelmark. So I head up all their digital properties in Canada, in Spain. We do our digital ad products. So been there about 6-7 years now, and before that I was at TVO. We did digital media there, as well as a bunch of educational technology, so games in the classroom, a lot of stuff that the province of Ontario supplies to its classrooms, digital learning really. And then before that is where John and I was at Torstar, so worked in various roles within Torstar. I got my start in product there. I wouldn't say you would call it product back in the day. I think I worked for something called Toronto Star City Search, and we kind of repatriated the technology, and then we were able to kind of go and build different things with it. This is in the late 90s, early 2000s, before even Google was a thing, and we started building things for users, and I think that was the start of journey into product. So I kind of fell into it, and I've been doing it for the last 2 decades plus. So I think I want to start with the point that building products, any kind of products, especially great products, is really difficult. Finding something that somebody wants, something that you can make a business out of is incredibly difficult, just that in and of itself. And if you couple that with the fact that most of us are in imperfect organizations, that work really becomes that much harder. And I know whoever's here today, many of us have worked in different organizations that have different ideas of what a product manager does or should do. And so you can often see that role of a PM. It's loosely defined. And you add in the fact, like myself, when I was starting out, depending on what you look at, more than half of PMs really don't have any formal training. So they're asked to fill a role where they've learned product on the job from whatever organization they're in, or where they came from in whatever role, and they supplement that with certificates and other training, and you just kind of go from there. And you kind of build your skill set. It's not like you can go to school necessarily and learn coding. It's not really the same kind of thing. So it's very difficult to kind of build these things, and the skills of a PM need to be wide ranging. They are far and they're wide ranging, and there's certain hard skills that I think John and his org have covered in past seminars. And it ranges from understanding customers and markets, and to being able to craft product strategies, to creating and executing roadmaps. I mean, the list is really endless of what you have to do. So there's a lot of hard skills, and there's a lot of resources to learn them, and some of it's on the job. And you just cannot be an effective PM without them. But I would also argue that a lot of the truly excellent PMs, they excel with soft skills. And building product really is a social thing. It involves people. It involves people from varying background, varying skill sets. You're dealing with different kinds of professionals within an organization, and you have to know how to interact with them, and you have to interact them well. And there are people with different wants, different expectations, different motivations, and it's really your job as a product manager to sit in the middle of all that and build this thing that's kind of great for the company or great for the end users. And so trying to navigate that to build something that can capture market share or achieve product market fit, it's incredibly difficult. And there are a lot of soft skills that kind of go into it, and soft skills that most of us have to some degree. But when you talk about soft skills, they're really intangibles. They're harder to measure. They often involve your personality, your behavior, emotions play a big part of kind of soft skills. And to some degree, they're not things that you really learn formally, but they are integral to being able to kind of deliver and build projects. So if you think of some of the soft skills that are out there, think of communication, empathy, leadership, collaboration, adaptability, problem solving. I would throw in focus, resiliency. There's a lot of skills that you have to learn, and you need these to some extent to be effective. And they're not always the skills that people try to develop. I mean, often you hear product managers and they're like, well, how do I be more effective creating a roadmap, or how do I make my backlog better, or how do I do better with product strategy? But there's a lot of these soft skills that kind of sit in the middle that really are going to be the criteria for whether or not you're successful. And today, as John said, I want to look at some of these skills. And when I thought about doing this presentation, I was torn as to whether to try to do something that covered 3 or 4 skills, or whether I really wanted to focus in on one. I ended up going for the latter, and the skill I wanted to focus on was possibly the most amorphous out of all the skills I just mentioned, and that's really around communication. And I would argue that communication is a fundamental skill for any human, not only at work, but anyone trying to live any kind of meaningful life. It's in no way specific to the world of product management, but I'd also argue that it's one of the most vital skills for any PM to develop. And so that's why I wanted to talk about communication. But I also wanted to kind of turn it and talk about it through specifically a product lens. So I'm not going to help you kind of have conversations with your spouse or kind of debate with your kids. Maybe it'll come in handy, but this is really about, like, how do we apply communication to product? And I can't tell you how many resumes I've looked at over my career, but I'd be willing to bet that more than 95% of them say something along the lines of excellent communication skills or superior oral and written communication skills. It's on every resume, and it's almost to the point where it becomes meaningless. And I think part of that is the criteria for being effective at communication is so vague and it's so wide ranging. So we all do it, and so everybody just kind of puts it on a resume. And for some, it's the ability to speak well and speak confidently. For others, it's about clarity in writing or the ability to simplify concepts. And I think all of those are important, but how do we really try to break that down further? How do we put it into a context for product managers that can help them in their day-to-day jobs? And so it's actually funny when I talk to PMs. It's such a multifaceted job, and there's such a variety of skill sets. And when you talk to people, you're like, okay, how do we develop you? Nobody can come into this job and be good at everything. You just can't do it. It's too wide ranging. But you can learn, and you can. We often ask, like, what do you think you're good at out of these skills, and which skills do you want to improve? And communication never comes up. It's never on the list, which I find actually funny, because when you break down what's kind of going wrong in a job, or if something's stalling out, you can always trace it back to some kind of communication. Not always. I mean, there's things that can happen, but often you can trace it back to kind of communication and getting better at that. So before I dig into maybe I'm going to throw some thoughts to the group today and see. I'll put some ideas out as to how I think you can improve your communication skills, or some things to look at or maybe evaluate or focus on. I think it's important to look at the downstream effects or the consequences of poor communication. And I've put up a bunch of things up here. If you're not communicating well within your organization, you often end up with team members working on the wrong things that aren't aligned with the vision or the current priorities. You can waste resources and time, scrapping items, moving stuff around. It can really mess up team goals. You can also, in terms of stakeholders, we all have kind of bosses to answer to, or people who are sponsoring projects. And poor communication can often lead to misunderstandings or loss of trust within a group. Sometimes it can lead to the cancellation of a project or a product. So it's vital to stakeholder management. The team goals, inefficiency and development kind of touches to that as well. If you're not clear with requirements passed down to a development team, you can end up doing multiple iterations of the same work. Everything can get slowed down. I'll kind of breeze through these a little bit. User experience issues. If you're not communicating with your users or giving them a venue to communicate back, feedback that you get might be compromised. User expectations won't be met. And it can lead to more negative feedback or decreased user engagement. And so it really goes on and on. You can get into conflict and low morale if people aren't understanding things. There's conflicts with the team, arguments over who should be doing what or why decisions were made. It just kind of spirals. Deadlines get missed, marketing and sales fall out of the loop, and you can even get into kind of legal and compliance issues, all of a result because you're not really kind of communicating well. And so I think just by showing the consequences of poor communication, you can almost make the argument that effective communication can actually help with some of this. And so how do we break that down? How do we break that down further? I'm going to start off with looking at some what I would call general communication foundations. So when we talk about communication, it isn't really just talking. It's I would say it's the glue that holds a project together. And whether it's something simple like a team update or a stakeholder briefing, I think the 4 principles that I'm going to talk about here can help you land your message effectively. I think I went to the wrong slide. This is the right slide. So I think the first piece is really around knowing that communication isn't really around relaying facts. It's about enabling others to succeed in their role. And you have to understand who needs what information in an organization. And if you're a product manager, you're going to be dealing with a lot of different teams. You're going to have engineering, you're going to have sales, design, executives. And these people rely on the information that you give them to make decisions, to plan out other things, and to create actions. And so if a PM doesn't understand why a stakeholder needs a certain piece of information, they may over or under communicate or just send things that are useless. And you can spend hours crafting an email and nobody reads it because it's the wrong thing. So I think it's important to be systematic. You need to map out who needs what. Not everybody needs every level of detail, and some don't need any detail at all. So you don't want to over communicate to the wrong people. You don't want to create messages that people won't need. You need to have a good understanding before you even try to communicate who needs what information and kind of how do I get them. And then when you've got that, I think you need to know who your audience is and what their motivations are. Everyone has different motivations in a product. It's usually the PM has the bigger user goals or success of the product, but within that kind of wheel, everybody has different motivations, and you need to understand who your audience is and what their motivations may be. So, for example, execs, they might just want high-level outcomes. Are we on track for the delivery in the next quarter? Is the budget, is kind of the spend within budget? They might just want simple things like that. Engineers may need specifics. They want to know if the API latency is going to be, needs to be less than 200 milliseconds. The sales team might just want to know when is the feature that I've been asking for coming out in the release, right? And so knowing who your audience is and what it is they might be looking for helps you kind of tailor that communication. So it could be, you might need to practice summarizing for execs. What are the quick hitting things that I need to kind of talk about versus detailed breakdowns for tech? You have to be able to do both, and you have to be able to do both well. And so I think the other thing that I'll get into before we start talking about how to communicate is you also have to know the medium matters as much as the message in some ways, right? Like Slack might be great for quick engineer updates, but a customer facing delay, you might need a formal email. So PMs need to know their audience, and so map that out ahead of time. So for Slack teams, you might want quick syncs, low stake updates, day-to-day Q&As. Email may be more formal updates or for broader distribution. Documents maybe kind of posted on Confluence or wherever with detailed plans or references that can be used async. And then meetings, maybe it's for decisions or broader alignment or kind of brainstorm. So mapping that out is one way to really kind of get an idea of who needs what information and organizing yourself around knowing your audience and what they need to do before you even try to kind of make the communication done well. And then I think the other piece is writing and speaking practice. Most of this is, I mean, there may be other communication methods, but I think speaking and writing, maybe some interpretive dance, I don't know, but most of us write, most of us speak, and you need to practice these things. And you'll be probably naturally better at one than the other. And I would say, look at which one you're better at and practice the other. I think for writing, you want to focus on clarity over complexity. Use simple, direct language. Ask yourself, could a non-expert understand this? Provided it's not a tech doc, then you want some technical words in there. I would also structure content with purpose. So organize with a main follow-up and then kind of build off that. So our deadline is at risk, and then follow that up with, okay, why is it like this and what would be? So you kind of build in, and it's not kind of big, long, rambling emails that people have to parse through. And the last one I would say is, I mean, I worked for a news organization for years, and anyone in the newsroom will tell you, edit for brevity ruthlessly. Long-winded writing wastes time, cut fluff, all the due to the fact that blah, 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 get all that stuff out of there and just edit for brevity and try and write for simplicity. So those are just some general writing tips. For speaking, I would say pause. I find a lot of people, PMs, they'll rush through updates and meetings, they'll go super fast. Practice pausing, give listeners time to process what it is you're saying, kind of let things settle in, slow everything down. There's no need to rush and really kind of think of going slow. I think learning how to summarize is a hugely valuable skill. So practice boiling down complex discussions into 1 or 2 sentences. I mean, go in and read an article on anything, any topic you want, and then see if you can summarize it yourself. Get to the heart of it in 3 sentences. Say it out loud. What were you saying? And then ask people for feedback and say, I was going to this room. Did I convey that message appropriately? And then I would adapt it delivered to the room. So speaking to dev requires technical precision. Execs require big picture focus and consequences. So know who it is you're talking to and possibly what they would want from the information you're giving them. The last one is have a point and stay on point. So if there's one thing I would tell everybody before you write an email or before you go into a meeting, ask yourself 2 things. My goal of this meeting is to what? And number 2, when I leave this, a successful outcome would mean that X had happened. And I think if you can get in the habit of doing those 2 things, a lot of communications will go a lot easier. So, for example, the purpose of this meeting is to explain new features being released to the sales team. If you have that in your head, that's what I'm here for. And a successful outcome in your head would be each sales member will be able to talk intelligently about this set of features with their customers. So stay on point, have a point. I think oftentimes it's just easy to say that at the start of a meeting. Here's what I want out of today. And kind of let that sit and then ask people at the end, did you get out what I want at the end of that? And then if future questions come up around, hey, what about the next release or what about that? You can kind of center back to what that is and get back to the topic. And again, follow up, ask feedback, and learn from it. And I think you'll find generally you'll start to get better if you kind of take some of those general ideas. And so I would say that those are probably I call them general communication foundations. So they set the stage, but I want to zoom into what I would call product specific comms. So this isn't just about informing people. I mean, informing is a huge part of what PMs do and what they need to do, but this is about steering the ship. And these are really 4 skills that I think all PMs need to some degree, and they don't teach us this stuff anywhere. You kind of pick this stuff as you go, and you have to learn them. And so the first one I would call out is really articulation. So articulation is almost what I was talking a little bit about before in that sales meeting. Can you precisely and clearly explain things that are necessary, right? And so you would use these if you're explaining product features to technical stakeholders or customers, or you're presenting product roadmaps or updates in team meetings. And so you're looking for clarity, you're looking for conciseness, you're looking, depending on the subject, to translate technical jargon into layman's terms, strong writing skills for documentation. So articulation is, I'd say, the first one. It's just explaining concepts. And I think the way to develop these skills are to participate in workshops, join a writing group, practice explaining tech concepts to somebody who isn't in the industry. Do they understand it? And record yourself doing that. Listen to it. Listen to yourself and play it back and say, does this make sense? Am I doing a good job? You have to kind of hone and craft this. The second type of skill is facilitation. So I think anybody who has worked in product or wants to work in product knows that PMs facilitate all kinds of interactions. But being a good facilitator takes different skills than being a good articulator. So think about brainstorming sessions or design thinking workshops or sprint planning or retrospective. The skills here aren't necessarily clarity or translating complex to simple. The skills here are more active listening, encouraging discussion, ensuring voices are heard, conflict resolution, time management. So you think if you're thinking about facilitating, when would you use it? You'd use it for brainstorming, you'd use it for sprint planning, you'd use it in a lot of kind of the agile ceremonies, and you're really there to ensure all voices are heard and how decisions are made. The skills needed, like we said, active listening is a big one. Listen to what people are saying, listen to concerns. Conflict resolution is a big one. Time management, obviously, focus, keep people on track. Encouraging discussions, I think, is a big one for PMs. There's always somebody quiet in the group who's probably often the smartest person in there. You need to get all those perspectives on the table. You need to get those people talking. And so different set of skills that's needed from just articulating. And so some development ideas, and I've got some sheets for takeaways if anyone wants any of this, is really, there's facilitation techniques you can learn to get simple decisions. Most people will use some kind of product development methodology. There's Scrum ceremonies that allow for facilitation. You can learn how to run a design sprint. There's concepts like Fist of Five to get kind of ideas about how long something will take, or the 5 whys to dive into kind of the bottom of what is something. But you need to learn these skills, and you kind of need to go and poke around and say, like, how do I gain some more insight and to be able to facilitate. And there's even just simple things for making decisions. Can you enable dot voting, for example, to kind of get agreement on concepts? So this facilitation thing is really an important tool for when you're trying to kind of parse or organize some kind of group activity that really boils down to the essence of what it is you're trying to achieve, and it's a lot different than articulation. The third type that I'd want to talk about, and this really applies to PMs, and this is about influence. So I think most people here know that PMs lack direct authority over most of the teams they interact with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's ends or sales or marketing. So influence really needs to be the superpower. It's aligning people without the direct mandate to have them kind of report to you. And we all know we have to influence stakeholders, team members, other disciplines, but it takes a different set of skill to be good at this. And the first thing I would say to anybody looking to improve their influencing skills is to think about persuasive communication. How good are you at creating a compelling argument that resonates with an audience, whether that's a developer or a senior exec that you're trying to kind of convince of something? And so it requires a certain amount of emotional intelligence. You have to understand your motives. You have to understand other people's motives. There's an element of storytelling to this. You have to be able to craft a story. And there's an element of assertiveness. You need to know when you have to kind of be firm and kind of know where you're the subject matter expert. And so it's not really arm twisting. A lot of people kind of talk about influencing as arm twisting, and I think it's more planting seeds. And so you're not necessarily demanding. I think very few PMs succeed if they go in demanding something. You have to learn how to frame. So if we ship this early, we beat the competition, we win, we might get more resources for the dev team. So you're always working on, how do you persuade? How do you frame something? How do you put something in a context that delivers value for whatever that team's motivation? So there's a lot of understanding motivations on the other side, and then figuring out how you can craft compelling stories for that. So that is number 3, and you really have to learn how to storytell. And there's a bunch of good kind of resources out there that can help you create compelling narratives. I mean, it's interesting to look at psychology, like go outside the product discipline on persuasion techniques and how you can get people to buy in. And it's often about benefits. It's often what's in it for the other side. So I think influencing is a super important piece of communication that a PM needs. And the fourth type is probably how most of us spend our existence, and this is around negotiation. This is a PM's life. I think projects and products hinge on trade-offs. So being a strong negotiator, and that doesn't mean you have to kind of win every deal and you're at tables kind of negotiating with all kinds of people, but negotiating is a daily thing. It keeps scope, time, and quality in balance. Nobody wants a burned out team or a half-baked product. And having good negotiating skills is kind of really what can allow you to avoid that. And so it's up to a PM to really learn. And the key to this is to learn where you can make trade-offs and to be flexible. So you have to have understanding of where your kind of line in the sand is, and you have to find common ground around that. So there's an art to saying no in there, but there's an art to also finding wins. I call it, you find it wins. If everybody can win, it's a good negotiation. And so often there's this concept called reframing, which can really help kind of on negotiation. So if a dev team says we can't hit that date, you reframe, okay, well, what about paring back a feature or two, right? You come at with an open-ended question. Or if somebody says, there's no way we can finish that in 2 weeks, you're crazy, you can't get that out the door. Well, reframe it and come back and say, well, if we look at it and say, what could we build in 2 weeks? What would that be? Ask open-ended questions. What's your biggest worry if we did this? What's the biggest blocker? And so I think negotiation is kind of really opening up that vault of kind of what isn't possible, what is possible, and finding common ground and us being able to do this. And I would say the best way to get good at this is to practice. And it's hard to practice in the middle of this. You can be fired up or trying to get something done, but most of us have product teams. And I think there's a bunch of prep you can actually do where you pick a scenario and you role play with product peoples, and you give one a scenario. If we add this feature, can we push out launch a week? And that's their starting position. And then through a conversational dialogue, asking open questions or looking for common ground or doing this role playing, you can actually kind of find out how to be comfortable in those environments and debrief and watch yourself and what felt smooth and where did you think you caved, and were your decisions grounded in what was best for the product, and you can kind of debrief and look at that and figure out how you can kind of get better at this. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I think even if you found some of these things useful, I think it's always good as a PM to look at that and say, when you're going into anything, a meeting or a brainstorm or whatever, which one of these skills am I going to be using, and which ones of these am I good at? I think if you can figure out, you know what, I'm a really good negotiator, but I'm not really great at influencing, or I'm really good at facilitating things, but I really suck when it comes down to negotiating. I think just being aware of them, that they're separate things, and kind of leaning into that, I think it can go a long way for helping PM succeed. So that, John, I was 31 minutes. So I think I was kind of on time with what we're doing. I've put a little more kind of meat on here if anybody wants the kind of presentation or to follow up. But I think I'll pause there and kind of wrap up and take questions or open up a discussion or whatever we may do.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, Gerard. And first of all, thank you very much for, just, I really, I actually took a lot of notes during your presentation. And I know when we had met maybe a couple months ago around what your topic would be, I'm really happy that you kind of landed on zooming in on communication, because I've had recent experience on communication. It will go into the discussion. But I think communication's like one of those things where it's recognized as probably one of the most important skills for product management. But in terms of developing it, it's not as easy as you would think. Because I think you really did a great job articulating what are the outcome, like the bad outcomes of poor communication. But I think it's like, where are each of us in that development curve, and how do we improve on that? So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll just share with the audience is that, so I did a quick search on LinkedIn. I was like, when did Gerard and I work together? So it was actually 9 years ago. We said 13
Was it
years.
9?
Not only 9 years. So it's so it's
No,
not
it couldn't have been. 9 years ago, I was at TVO.
Was it? Okay, maybe it's not okay. It's not as bad. But my point in sharing that is that I remember working with Gerard. So we worked at Torstar, which is a huge media conglomerate here in Toronto. And I remember my time there. I would meet Gerard in the office, and my takeaways from Gerard, and this still holds true, is that very proficient communicator, was able to communicate with the CEOs, the C-level suite really effectively. He was always like a trusted voice, and I think it's probably the way he communicated. He was the type of person who was able to, one, drive warmth, like so, being very authentic, empathetic, but he was always, a lot of these things that he's talking about, like you presented today. I mean, you sort of exemplified those back then. I would say as you've evolved as a product leader, you probably have refined it more and probably become more efficient in your craft. But that's our remember. I mean, I was just kind of reminiscing a little bit there.
Yeah.
So that's the
Well,
thing I wanted
thanks for
to share.
sharing that. I mean, I still come out of meetings to this day, and I'm like, holy smokes, that went sideways. And and which part am I not getting across? And did this message resonate? So, I wouldn't say I've mastered it in any way, shape, or form, but I think you have to learn pieces of this as you go, and you just got to keep working at it because when you get it right or you do nail it, you don't notice it, right? It just kind of thing seems to flow and it seems to be good. It's when it falls apart. And I know even like in a leadership role, if you actually dig into why something went sideways sometimes, often it is just because people aren't communicating and they're not on the same page, or a negotiation went really badly, or and there was a big blow up, or you're building the wrong thing. So I think highlighting what happens when you don't do it well, but like I say, it's one of those vague things that it's kind of hard to kind of practice. So hopefully I can put some framing around things to look at.
Yeah, so I have some questions for you, and I encourage the audience just to make questions as well too. You talked about, being very systematic in communication, which I think is more important now than it was when we were working together, because back then we were always in the office, and now you have, remote, hybrid working environments. Some organizations have moved it, like, there's different variations of it. So I would argue that, communication has become a lot more complex in a way. What has your sort of experience been? Because I don't have full visibility on kind of like your work environment now, but I
Yeah,
can imagine that everyone has works in different sort of um, situations. What has
yeah.
your experience been, and how does that influence communication from your point of view?
Yeah. We're fully remote in that we go in the office. We have an office and we can move around. I'd say a couple of things. I think from a brainstorming perspective, or when you're kind of sharing ideas or want to kind of choose something over, I still find it difficult and not as effective as being in person. I look for those in-person moments for that. Just reading body language, side conversations, group dynamic. I just think that the brainstorming aspect of things is a lot more powerful when you're in person. But that's not always the case. So you can kind of make do, and you have to be super aware. And it's funny, we were in the office the other day, and I found myself raising my hand because I couldn't raise my little Zoom hand to kind of get a question, and it was just it's like this is where we've kind of done a full 360. But I think the mapping out the comms is important, right? Because you always hear the kind of you can't over communicate cliche. Um, but I think maybe more apt is to say, are you communicating the right things to the right people? And when you're not in the office, you miss the flybys where you see somebody at the fridge or the water fountain, and then like, oh, I didn't know that, or this couldn't be this. So you don't know what you don't know if you're not there and you're not talking to people. So I think it's super important that you understand you have your stakeholders. This is a sales team. What do the sales team need to know about the things that we're building and releases, or the eng team? What do I need them to know about conversations I've had with the exec group or feedback that's getting from sales? So I think mapping it out and being really um, precise in who needs to know what is is even more important here because you don't necessarily get the feedback as you would in the office because nobody's going to book a meeting to say, did you understand or were you aware of what happened? So I think you don't have the casual connection point. So I think it's the structure around systematically mapping that is important.
Yeah, no, I totally hear. I totally completely agree what what you said. I mean, just to add to that, I find because I'm in a work remote environment too as well too. I find that time is like attention, like not even it's time, it's attention. People's attention is so precious because, like for example, you can be on like a 30-minute call, and the thing is that most folks are either like they multitasking, they're checking their phone. And like some people are on camera, off camera. So being a really effective communicator is super important. And what I would say that I've learned through my experience is, stating like what's your elevator pitch? Like what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Why are we here today?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I think what you said earlier in the presentation in terms of what is like laying out the agenda, like having it in your, in your agenda is really key. So that way everyone understands that. Having some one or two visuals is super important too. But brevity is key because I think though if you drag things out, people will drift and they'll zoom out.
Yeah.
And it's important to have, I would say, checkpoints. So you get like don't go like go over the details. Do some checkpoints to say, okay, I'll pause here to answer questions.
Yeah.
Gerard, like like it looks like call out people's names to make sure to drive that engagement because ultimately you're looking for certain outcomes decisions from these meetings versus just spinning wheels. And I think that's becomes super important in a remote setting.
Yeah. I think checkpoints is a great idea. Yeah.
Um, One thing I wanted to ask you too was how, like, we live in a rural world where there's a lot of AI tools. Like, do you find AI? How does you find AI influencing in terms of the way you communicate, or you see other product managers communicate?
I mean, I think it's such a tool that can help PMs with so many aspects. I'll just kind of leave it to communication, but you can you can often so something that I will do, I'll put an email of a tone of something that I've written and I'll say, okay, then you can kind of filter something in and you can say, this is my audience, this is the tone I want to use. Please prepare this for me, and it can save reams amount of times. You can look at it and you can say, make it crisper, synthesize it
Mhm.
more. How do I pull out the main point? You can repurpose this now. Repurpose this results to see an exec team. It is such a useful tool. And as most of us know, LLMs, they shine with language, right? Like language is a strength. So I mean, there's so many applications for AI within product, but communications, it can save you so much time. If you just get, I mean, you might not have to be a great writer. Now that you say that, you just might have to be a great prompt writer.
Mhm.
But yeah, they're a super powerful tool for getting the tone you want, for conciseness, for repackaging it for a different audience. Really, really good tool. So totally recommended. Just
Yeah,
make
no,
sure you have your own company AI. Don't be putting kind of information out there into the
no, that's a good
wild.
disclaimer.
Yeah,
So I'll share some things I've learned through AI. I think like I'll speak from a product leader perspective. Like when you're like, I think there's a sense of awareness that you were hinting at about your communication style, and there's lots of AI transcripts, and I think your call out on just like just being very careful around sensitivity around what you like have transcribed. But I think sometimes you think you communicate a certain way. You might be very sort of brief or to the point. But it's until you kind of have like let's say use like a tactique, a fathom, or like a granola that takes like essentially everything you talk about. And when you start reading, it's like, did I really say that? Do I use
yeah,
filler words? That's
yeah,
where I think a lot of the awareness comes. And
yeah,
I think that when you actually see it and let's say, how do I refine this? And that's where you can use AI to say, how can I
yeah,
say this more succinctly? I think that's something where AI can be a real coaching tool.
100%.
And
Yeah,
then the second point that you said, which is totally on, is AI, with Gemini, with like if you're using Gmail, you can essentially have everything pretty much crafted. I mean, it goes through your entire email and it kind of prompts you for things. So I would say that a lot of the things that were traditionally we would spend hours doing, like, not like half an hour doing it over email, you can do it in like, a couple minutes now.
Yeah,
I
you
think
can
it's
paste documents. You can paste full documents in and say summarize this for whatever audience. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one other question about the four communication skills, and then there's some questions from the audience here.
Yeah.
So I actually liked how you framed like the four types of product centric communication. So let me just pull up the slide here. So you had, yeah, uh, yeah, articulation, facilitate, influencing, negotiation. Where do you think, I think you hinted it before, but what do you think is the most important for a PM and why?
I would say you've got to go with influence, and I think really PMs sit at the middle of kind of like the functions to deliver a product, right? You have eng, you have sales, you have marketing, whatever, all those kind of pieces, and your job as a product person is that end user or that kind of end product. Probably nobody else's, maybe the exec stakeholders, has that same exact end goal as you. They all have other motivations, right? You could have a dev who's like, yes, they want to build your features for you, but they need their code to be super clean and they're worried about tech debt, and or a salesperson that's really just worried about their numbers for that target and aren't necessarily caring as much about the future of the thing. So you have to be able to influence them into kind of moving things the way you want it. And it's very unlikely that you have direct kind of report authority over any of those people. So you have to be able to get good at influencing them, and you have to be able to be good at persuading them into kind of ways that you actually want to move stuff. And I would say negotiation falls right under it, right? Because then it's about trade-offs and balance. And you don't want to get into the world of trade-offs to the point of dilution, but really being able to persuade and influence and communicate around that, I think it's the key one if I had to pick one.
No, actually, so I was hoping you would do it, and actually, those are the two that I would pick. I mean, I agree with that influencing, as whether you're a product leader influencing the vision, like where you want to drive a product strategy or product portfolio, or a product manager. Ultimately, the thing I hear from some product managers is that they want full autonomy, and the problem is that my sort of explanation to them is that unless like you're running your own company, there's no such thing as full autonomy. So the thing is that you have to work with engineering, legal, product marketing, design, and you have to total align together. So it's like everyone has competing different priorities, and it's about how do you drive those desired outcomes. And a lot of it is on influencing. And like sales may say, for example, I want a full feature product. But the thing is that you don't want to overly invest in something where there's not a lot of adoption, or there's not a lot
Right.
of there's not any sales to it. So the most important thing is like trying to just influence everyone to be aligned. Like, this is the plan, this is how we're going to
Yeah.
measure, and drive that user-centric design thinking in terms of execution and learning. And it's just that culture is so important. And the negotiation thing, I agree, is secondary, because here's the thing that I tell product leaders and product managers is that your time is the most valuable. So it's just kind of like, with that, you have to like be able to like push back on things. And part of that is not like hard negotiations in terms of like, you're doing like a partnership, whatever, but there is some negotiating with like I mean, like your boss, for example, or
Yeah.
other levels. And so
Yeah.
we want this. Well, there's trade-offs, and it's more
Yeah.
about the influence negotiation. It plays a
And
little
and
bit hand in hand.
and
So
I was talking about negotiation more from a kind of proactive on how you get stuff that you want, rather than I think we could probably do a whole seminar on the art of saying no, and kind of how that works, because I think that's probably 80% of a PM's job is how to say no
oh
gracefully.
my God, yeah, totally.
So yeah. But
Okay, we're gonna
persuasive
take
communication is where it's at for a PM. Yeah.
awesome. So there's a couple questions that I'll take from the audience. So first question is, how do you deal with hardline C-suite stakeholders? For example, when communicating while a milestone or deliverable, which was estimated 3 weeks ago, needs to be push, push now.
Yeah, I think the first part you have to do is you have to understand. It goes back to knowing your audience, right? And knowing who in the C-suite it is, and maybe kind of what their what their outlook to the project or the organization is, right? There's some C-suites that get product, right? There's some C-suite people who like, I don't know what product is. They think it's project management. They're just like, get me the damn thing. And so I think that the best way to go about that, I would say, is to be as concise, accurate, not emotional as you can. This is why we are doing something. This is why it was pushed. List the reasons of what it was and list the repercussions of doing that. Now, there can always, if there's options, you could say, hey, we could force this to go live. I don't know, it risks stability of the platform. We decided not to make that decision, right? And some C-suites may follow up with that, but I think you want to be concise, articulate, and honest, right? You may have messed something up. It's better off to just say, look, we overestimated or underestimated, or we made a mistake with something. But I think if somebody asks you, dramatically, you just have to kind of give them the answer. I think that was the question, or was the question more around, I won't take no for an answer?
I think they were suggesting that. I mean, I think broadly speaking, and I'm just kind of reading to the question a little bit. It's like, I think in this day and age, I think there's a lot of sort of top-down decision making that
Yeah,
happens in terms of trying to meet business objectives, and part of it could be based on delivery, timelines.
yeah,
And I think one of the things that I like what you said, which I'll elaborate a little bit more, is like, I think at the end, no one wants to be told no. I mean, you as a PM, like if someone said, for example, I want to build this, and they say, no, we can't do it because of XYZ. No one wants to be told that. So I think the empathy part that you talked about, we have to apply in this situation. The
yeah,
second thing that you said too, which was, like explain the why and explain like the options. Like for example, if you want to launch this now, there might be some gaps and this is what it is. This is the reason why we did this. And if you give options and explain those options and explain the trade-offs, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we can launch something now. It may be poor quality. We
yeah,
might, churn some customers as a result of
yeah,
that, but we don't have any data to validate that. I mean, those are the things that you have to be very, very, very forward about presenting. So that way, if the decision is made at the top down, it can't be like, because I didn't inform you when we
right,
did this one. Because I think sometimes there's this reactionary thing that happens. It's coming down from the top, and I just need to deliver. Part of
yeah,
your job as a product owner is to inform and to communicate the trade-offs. And then the other thing I'll say is dependencies. Sometimes when you're doing things, there are dependencies on other things. So I think dependency mapping is really ultra key in delivering that
yeah.
message.
I think clarity of kind of what went on, but you're right. Like it's scope, quality, or deadline. Those are the three variables that you have. You can cut the scope, you can push back the deadline, or you can impact the quality. That is ultimately the trade-off. And I think articulating that, um, I would probably articulate the choice, like you say. It's a good answer. Articulate what the choice is, and then deal after, because you often get, well, why did this happen, right? And I always in a situation where you're trying to figure out how to do something or how to solve a problem, solve the problem or get to your answer, then go back later and figure out the why. Don't start all the kind of, well, this happened, that, leave all that, solve it, get to a resolution, and then do a retrospective on why the thing happened.
Yep, no, that sounds good. Another question is, what's the role of softer tactics like negotiation or influencing versus harder, such as escalation and decision making?
You cut out for me on the first piece. What was the start of
Yeah.
the question?
What's the role of softer tactics like negotiation or influencing versus harder, such as escalation in decision making?
Um, I don't fully get the question.
Yeah, I think
Could you reframe, whoever it
no,
is?
I'll try to reframe it better. I think what they're saying is when do you use hard, like what in what situations do you use softer tactics versus like let's say for example
Right. Yeah,
like
yeah.
you
I
like
think
let's
I
say
see
you
it.
need a decision, the soft like you're trying to
Got it.
negotiate, you're trying to influencing, and it's just not working to getting to
Yeah,
that decision point, or you're going to miss that
yeah.
every day.
So I get the question now. It's basically when do you escalate?
Yeah,
I think when you're building something, you have to know where what your lines in the sand are. So when you're negotiating, right, there's certain things you wouldn't negotiate away or not do. Um, and so, I mean, the answer might be, I don't know, you're building a form and the form packs out every 4 times you out of 10 that you launch it, right? So you have to know where your lines in the sand are. So there's certain things that you might not be able to concede on. And so if it gets to the point where the negotiation is going and somebody is like pushing you over that line, I think that's where you escalate. And you when you escalate, you're escalating to your manager or somebody else's manager. You have to be able to kind of frame the discussion. Here's where the discussion went. Here's where I was trying to move to. Here's why we can't accept where we are and we're at a loggerhead. How can you help me? How can you help me push through this?
yeah. No, that sounds no, that's totally on point. There's one more question I want to answer because we're actually getting close to the end
Yeah,
here. So you had mentioned earlier about sharing the deck out. So typically we don't share the deck out, but what I would like to do is if Gerard, would you mind going through the like 4 slides you had around each one, and then if the folks who ask for a hand up, maybe they could take a quick snapshot.
yeah.
Like so just go over each one and then they can take a snapshot of each one. So I think you had first one was
Two.
articulation, influence, negotiation, and facilitation.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. And when you watch the recording too, you can, take screen grabs with that as well too. So hopefully that's helpful. So believe it or not, we're at time. So
We are at time.
but you know what? Time really flew. And I think it really speaks to just like I think the depth that you went into an important topic. So and always good to catch up with you as well too. So I wanted to, on behalf of the Products That Counts community, Gerard, thank you very much. And as a friend, thank you very much for making time tonight and for today's webinar and really driving today's product conversation. So
My
um,
pleasure, Jonmichael. Always good to
okay,
see you. Good to connect. Stay
okay,
well.